My name is Lennon Brasken, and I've spent 15 years perfecting the art of being underestimated. While my neighbors drive luxury cars and flash designer watches, I iron my own shirts and clip grocery coupons. They see a man who settles for less. What they don't see is the $10 billion in assets I control through anonymous investment vehicles scattered across 3 continents. This morning started like any other. I sat at our kitchen table, reading fund reports on my tablet while Vanna bustled around, preparing for another day at her marketing firm. She wore a new dress, something expensive from a boutique downtown, and her frustration radiated like heat from a furnace. "Lennon, we need to talk about your attitude," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Tabitha's husband just bought her a new Mercedes. Meanwhile, you're driving that ancient Honda like it's some badge of honor." I glanced up from a quarterly report showing my energy portfolio had gained another 200 million. The Honda runs fine, gets good gas mileage. That's exactly what I'm talking about. She finally looked at me, her green eyes flashing with irritation. "You have no ambition, no drive. You're content being mediocre while other men are out there building empires." If she only knew. My mediocre lifestyle funded her shopping sprees, our mortgage, and the vacation home she thought we couldn't afford but somehow managed to keep. The irony tasted bitter as coffee grounds. "Some empires are built quietly," I said, returning to my tablet. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, just thinking out loud." Vanna huffed and grabbed her purse. "Well, maybe it's time you started thinking bigger. I've arranged something for tonight that might open your eyes to how successful men actually live." She paused at the door, her expression shifting to something almost predatory. "We're having dinner with Miles Reddick. Remember him? He's doing incredibly well for himself. 7 figures last year alone." Miles Reddick. Her college boyfriend who'd made a fortune in tech before transitioning to finance. The same Miles Reddick whose investment fund had been courting my anchor capital for 6 months through intermediaries, not knowing they were essentially begging me to invest in myself. "Sounds thrilling," I said. 8 o'clock. Romano's downtown, private dining room." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Try to dress nicely. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself." The door closed behind her with more force than necessary. I sat in the sudden quiet, contemplating the beautiful symmetry of the situation. Vanna wanted to humiliate me by showing off her successful ex-boyfriend. That same ex-boyfriend was unknowingly about to pitch me an investment opportunity using my own money. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. "Ms. Bellamy, it's Lennon. I need you to prepare some documents for me. Tonight might get interesting." The rest of the day crawled by with agonizing slowness. I handled routine business from my modest home office, a room Vanna constantly complained was too small for a real workspace. She had no idea that this cramped space had orchestrated deals worth more than most small countries' GDP. At 7:30, I put on my best suit. It was a good suit, but not ostentatious. The kind of thing a middle manager might wear to a wedding. I checked my appearance in the mirror and practiced looking appropriately intimidated. Romano's was the kind of place where wealthy people went to see and be seen. Vanna had chosen it deliberately, knowing the prices would make me wince. She stood near the hostess station, radiant in a cocktail dress I'd never seen before. Beside her, Miles Reddick looked exactly like what he was, a man who'd made money recently and wanted everyone to know it. "Lennon." Miles extended his hand with the aggressive enthusiasm of a used car salesman. "Great to see you again, buddy. Vanna's told me so much about what you've been up to." "Has she?" I shook his hand, noting the Rolex submariner that caught the light as he moved. "I hope it was all boring." Miles laughed too loudly. "Modest guy. I like that. Come on, let's get to our table. I've got some things I think you'll find very interesting." The private dining room was intimate, with soft lighting and a view of the city skyline. Miles had clearly spared no expense, ordering wine that cost more than most people's rent. He talked constantly, about his portfolio, his new condo, his plans for expansion. Vanna hung on every word, shooting me meaningful glances that said, "See, this is how a real man behaves." "The thing about success," Miles was saying, gesturing with his wineglass, "is that you have to think big, take risks. Too many people play it safe and wonder why they never get ahead." I nodded thoughtfully, as if receiving profound wisdom. "That makes sense. Risk and reward." "Exactly." Miles leaned forward, his eyes lighting up. "Which brings me to why I really wanted to have this dinner. Vanna mentioned you might be looking for investment opportunities." I felt Vanna's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd handle being put on the spot. "I'm always open to learning about new opportunities." Miles smiled and reached into his jacket, pulling out a manila envelope. "This is something special, Lennon. A chance to get in on the ground floor of something big." He slid the envelope across the table with the flourish of a magician revealing a trick. "Take a look at that. I think you'll find it very interesting." I opened the envelope and pulled out a term sheet. My term sheet. The one my fund's legal team had prepared for potential anchor investors. Miles was literally trying to sell me shares in my own investment vehicle. "This looks comprehensive," I said, scanning the familiar language. "Can you walk me through the structure?" "Absolutely." Miles launched into his pitch, explaining how the fund worked, its investment strategy, its impressive returns. He was remarkably well informed for someone who was essentially a middleman trying to collect finder's fees. "The anchor investor is completely anonymous," he continued. "Some billionaire who prefers to stay behind the scenes. But his track record is incredible. This fund has consistently outperformed the market by double digits." "Impressive," I said. "Do you have the cap table appendix and the custody of signatures?" Miles blinked, clearly not expecting technical questions. "Oh, sure. Let me get that for you." He shuffled through the envelope and produced a second page. I studied it carefully, noting the watermark and the compliance footer at the bottom. Everything was legitimate, because it was mine. "This is fascinating," I said, pulling out my phone. "Do you mind if I make a quick call? I'd like to verify some of these details." Of course," Miles said, though he looked slightly uncomfortable. "Due diligence is important." I dialed the number printed at the bottom of the compliance page and put the phone on speaker. The room fell silent as it rang. "Brasken Capital Compliance, this is Jennifer speaking." "Hi Jennifer, this is Lennon Brasken. I'm in a meeting where someone is presenting investment materials for our anchor fund. I need you to verify the authorization for this solicitation." Miles went pale. Vanna looked confused, glancing between us with growing alarm. "Of course, Mr. Brasken. Can you provide the reference number on the materials?" I read off the number from the bottom of the term sheet. There was a pause as Jennifer accessed the system. "Sir, I show no authorized solicitation under that reference number. In fact, these materials appear to be confidential investor documents. Any unauthorized distribution would constitute a serious compliance violation." The silence in the room was deafening. Miles stared at the phone as if it might explode. "Thank you, Jennifer. Please flag this incident and forward the details to our legal department. I'll be sending them a recording of this conversation." "Understood, sir. Is there anything else you need?" "That's all for now." I hung up and looked at Miles, who appeared to be having difficulty breathing. "Interesting pitch, Miles. Though I have to ask, did you really think you could sell me shares in my own fund?" Vanna's face cycled through confusion, realization, and horror. "Lennon, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that your ex-boyfriend just tried to scam me using investment materials from a fund I control." I closed the envelope and stood up. "The anchor investor he mentioned? The anonymous billionaire? That would be me." Miles found his voice. "That's impossible. You're just some middle management guy. You drive a Honda." "I drive a Honda because I like reliable transportation. I live modestly because I don't need to impress anyone. and I control $10 billion in assets because I'm very good at what I do. I turned to the waiter, who had been hovering nervously near the door. Could you please split the check 3 ways? I'll be leaving now. As I walked toward the door, I heard Vanna call my name, but I didn't turn around. I had calls to make and documents to prepare. The evening's entertainment was just beginning. The drive home gave me time to process what had just happened. Miles Reddick, in his arrogance, had handed me the perfect weapon. Not only had he attempted an unauthorized solicitation using my own fund's materials, but he'd done it in front of witnesses while trying to humiliate me. The recording alone would be enough to destroy his credibility in financial circles. But as I pulled into our driveway, I realized this was about more than Miles. Vanna had orchestrated that dinner specifically to embarrass me. She'd wanted me to feel small, inadequate, jealous of her successful ex-boyfriend. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd expected. I was sitting in my office, forwarding the dinner recording to my legal team, when I heard Vanna's car in the driveway. She burst through the front door like a hurricane, her heels clicking angrily on the hardwood floor. "Lennon! What the hell was that about?" I looked up from my computer. Which part? The attempted fraud or the public humiliation? Don't play games with me. She stood in the doorway, her face flushed with anger and confusion. You can't seriously expect me to believe you're some secret billionaire. That's ridiculous. Is it? You've been married to me for 15 years, Vanna. Have you ever once asked where our money comes from? How we afford this house, your shopping trips, the vacation home in Colorado? She faltered for a moment. You said you had investments, some inheritance from your grandfather. I do have investments, about $10 billion worth, and my grandfather did leave me something, a trust fund that I've grown by approximately 10,000%. Vanna sank into the chair across from my desk, her anger replaced by bewilderment. That's impossible. You clip coupons. You drive that awful car. You buy generic cereal. I clip coupons because waste is wasteful. I drive a reliable car because I don't need to compensate for anything. And I buy generic cereal because it tastes the same as the name brand. I leaned back in my chair. The question isn't why I live modestly, Vanna. The question is why you set me up to be humiliated by your ex-boyfriend. Her face reddened. I wasn't trying to humiliate you. I was trying to motivate you. You act like you have no ambition, no drive. I thought maybe seeing how successful people live might inspire you to want more. More than $10 billion? Stop saying that. If you really had that kind of money, why would you keep it secret from your own wife? I studied her face, noting the way her eyes darted around the room as if seeing it for the first time. Because I wanted to know who you really were, and now I do. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is insane. You're having some kind of breakdown. People don't just secretly have billions of dollars. Some people do. I'm one of them. Prove it. I turned my computer screen toward her and pulled up one of my investment accounts, a relatively small one with only about 50 million in various holdings. Her eyes widened as she scanned the numbers. This could be fake. Anyone can manipulate a web page. I picked up my phone and called my private banker. David, it's Lennon. I need you to verify my current liquid position for my wife. Yes, she's having trouble believing the numbers. Of course. I handed her the phone. David Chen, my private banker at Goldman Sachs. Ask him anything you want. I watched her face change as David confirmed my identity, my account balances, my investment positions. When she finally handed the phone back, she looked like someone had struck her with a baseball bat. Why? She whispered. Why would you hide this from me? Because I needed to know if you loved Lennon Brasken, or if you loved the idea of being rich. Tonight, I got my answer. She opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. We both knew what she'd been thinking during that dinner. I'd seen it in her eyes when Miles talked about his success, when he flashed his expensive watch, when he painted me as a failure who needed inspiration. I need some air, she said finally. I need to think. After she left, I sat alone in my office, contemplating the wreckage of my marriage. 15 years of careful deception had crumbled in a single evening. But perhaps it was for the best. Now I knew exactly where I stood. My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at the screen and felt my stomach tighten. It was from Vanna's phone, but the message wasn't meant for me. "Miles, are you okay? Lennon's completely lost his mind. We need to talk." I stared at the message for a long moment, then checked the recipient. She'd meant to send it to Miles, but had accidentally sent it to me instead. A simple mistake that revealed everything I needed to know about her loyalties. I forwarded the message to my lawyer with a note: "Document everything. This is just the beginning." Over the next few days, Vanna moved through the house like a ghost. She'd tried calling Miles, but he wasn't returning her calls. His reputation in financial circles was already crumbling as word spread about his unauthorized solicitation attempt. My legal team had been thorough in their communications with industry regulators. I maintained my normal routine: modest breakfast, generic coffee, careful review of my portfolios. But now, there was a tension in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that our marriage was balanced on a knife's edge. On Thursday morning, Vanna's friend Tabitha came for coffee. I could hear their conversation from my office, and what I heard confirmed my worst suspicions. "He's obviously having some kind of crisis," Tabitha was saying. "Men his age sometimes develop delusions of grandeur. My cousin went through the same thing." "But the bank confirmed it," Vanna replied. "David Chen is real. I looked him up." "Honey, anyone can hire an actor. Or maybe he's been embezzling from his company. That would explain the sudden wealth and the secrecy." I had to admire Tabitha's creativity, rather than accept the simple explanation that I was exactly what I claimed to be. She was inventing elaborate conspiracy theories. "What should I do?" Vanna asked. "Protect yourself. If he's been stealing money, you could be liable. You need to document everything and maybe talk to a lawyer about your options." "You mean divorce?" "I mean covering your assets before this whole thing explodes. If Lennon's been living a double life, you need to figure out what's real and what isn't." I closed my laptop and walked into the kitchen. Both women looked up guiltily as I entered. "Good morning, Tabitha," I said pleasantly. "How's Robert doing? Still struggling with that consulting business?" Tabitha's face flushed. Her husband's business failures were a constant source of stress in their marriage. "He's doing fine, thank you." "That's good to hear. I was thinking of recommending him for some contract work. Nothing huge, maybe 50 or 60,000 to start. If you think he'd be interested." I could see the wheels turning in her head. $60,000 would solve most of their immediate financial problems, but accepting help from me would undermine her theory that I was delusional. "That's very generous," she said carefully. "Not at all. I believe in helping friends when I can." I poured myself a cup of coffee. Of course, I'd need to run it through my usual due diligence process. Background checks, financial verification, that sort of thing. Standard procedure for any significant contract. Tabitha's face went pale. A background check would reveal exactly how desperate their financial situation had become. "I'll mention it to Robert," she said, standing quickly. "I should get going. Vanna, we'll talk later." After she left, Vanna turned to me with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. What was that about? Just being neighborly. Though I have to say, Tabitha's theory about me embezzling money is creative. Does she really think I've been running a 15-year con just to impress my wife? She's trying to help me understand what's happening. What's happening is simple, Vanna. You married a man you thought was ordinary, and you've spent years resenting me for not being extraordinary. Now you've discovered I am extraordinary, and you're resenting me for not telling you sooner. I sipped my coffee. The question is, what are you going to do about it? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mental calculations. Anger warred with greed, betrayal with opportunity. Finally, she spoke. "I need time to process this. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about you, about our life together, it's all been a lie." Not a lie, just incomplete. That's the same thing. Maybe she was right. Maybe there was no meaningful difference between deception and omission when the stakes were this high. But I'd made my choice 15 years ago, and now we were both living with the consequences. That evening, I was reviewing quarterly reports when my phone chimed with another text message. This time, Vanna had sent it to the right recipient, but she'd forgotten that our phones were linked to the same cloud account. I could see every message she sent and received. Miles, I know you're avoiding me, but we need to talk. Lennon really does have money. A lot of it. This changes everything. His response came quickly. How much money? Billions. I saw the account statements. That's impossible. I've been tracking his credit for months. He's nobody. The bank confirmed it. We need to figure out how to handle this. I screenshotted the conversation and forwarded it to my lawyer. Then I opened my laptop and began researching divorce attorneys. Not for myself, for Vanna. I wanted to know who she might hire, what strategies they might employ, what weaknesses I needed to protect against. Because despite everything, the betrayal, the humiliation, the conspiracy with her ex-boyfriend, I still loved my wife. But love wasn't enough anymore. She'd shown me who she really was, and I couldn't unsee it. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor. I was in my office, analyzing a potential acquisition in the renewable energy sector, when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I could see a man in an expensive suit standing on my porch, checking his watch impatiently. I opened the door to find Miles Reddick looking considerably less confident than he had at dinner. His usual swagger had been replaced by nervous energy, and there were dark circles under his eyes. "Lennon," he said, forcing a smile. "I was hoping we could talk." "About what?" "About the other night. I think there was a misunderstanding." I stepped aside and gestured for him to enter. "Please, come in. Can I offer you some coffee? It's generic brand, but it does the job." Miles followed me into the living room, his eyes scanning the modest furniture and simple decorations. I could see him trying to reconcile what he was seeing with what he now knew about my financial position. "Nice place," he said, though his tone suggested he found it anything but nice. "Thank you. We like it." I settled into my favorite chair, a comfortable recliner I'd bought at a furniture warehouse 5 years ago. "Now, what can I do for you?" Miles perched on the edge of the couch, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I had no idea who you were when I made that presentation. If I'd known you were the anchor investor, obviously I would have approached things differently." "How would you have approached them?" "Well, I wouldn't have... the whole thing was just a networking opportunity. I thought maybe we could find some common ground, do some business together." I studied his face, noting the slight tremor in his hands and the way he kept glancing toward the door. "Miles, are you wearing a wire?" His face went white. "What? No. Why would you ask that?" "Because you're acting like someone who's trying to get me to say something incriminating. Are you working with the SEC, the FBI, some ambitious prosecutor looking to make a name for himself? That's crazy. I'm not working with anyone." I pulled out my phone and opened an app that detected electronic surveillance devices. The screen immediately lit up with a signal indicator pointing directly at Miles. "Interesting," I said, showing him the screen. "Either you're wearing recording equipment or you've got a very sophisticated pacemaker." Miles deflated like a punctured balloon. "Look, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. But first, I think you should know that this conversation is being recorded by my home security system. Everything you say is being stored on encrypted servers and automatically forwarded to my legal team." I leaned forward slightly. "So, choose your words carefully." "This is insane. You can't just record people without their consent." "Actually, I can. This is my home, and there are signs posted at the entrance indicating that the premises are under surveillance. You consented to being recorded the moment you walked through that door." Miles stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger and panic. "You think you're so smart, don't you? sitting here in your little house, playing your little games. But money doesn't make you untouchable. No, it doesn't. But it does make me very good at protecting myself from people who try to scam me. I remained seated, my voice calm and steady. Who sent you here, Miles? Who convinced you to wear a wire into my home? Nobody sent me. I just wanted to clear the air. While secretly recording our conversation. That's an interesting way to clear the air. He headed for the door, then stopped and turned back. This isn't over, Lennon. You humiliated me in front of everyone. You destroyed my reputation. You think you can just walk away from that? I think I can walk away from attempted fraud, yes. What you choose to do with your reputation is your business. After he left, I called my head of security, a former FBI agent who handled personal protection for several high-net-worth individuals. Brady, it's Lennon. I need a full security assessment of my property and a background check on Miles Reddick. Someone's convinced him to take a run at me, and I want to know who. How deep do you want me to dig? All the way to bedrock. Financial records, phone logs, recent contacts. And Brady? I think my wife might be involved. There was a pause. You sure about that? No, but I need to know either way. That afternoon, Vanna returned from a shopping trip with several bags from expensive boutiques. She seemed almost giddy, her earlier confusion replaced by a kind of manic energy. I bought some new clothes, she announced, modeling a designer dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. What do you think? It's very nice? Special occasion? Just felt like treating myself. After all, we can afford it, right? She spun around, the dress flaring out around her. I'm thinking of redecorating the house, maybe getting a new car, something more appropriate for our situation. I watched her carefully, noting the deliberate emphasis on certain words. What kind of car were you thinking about? I don't know. A BMW, maybe. Or a Mercedes. Something that says we've arrived. Arrived where? She stopped spinning and looked at me with exasperation. At success, Lennon. At the life we should have been living all along. And what life is that? The life of people who have money, real money, the kind of money that opens doors and commands respect. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't the woman I'd married. This was someone else entirely. Someone intoxicated by the possibility of wealth and status. Vanna, can I ask you something? Of course. If you'd known about the money from the beginning, would you have married me? She hesitated just long enough to answer my question. That's not fair. Of course I would have. But you're not sure. I'm sure. I wish you'd trusted me enough to tell me. We could have had such a different life. Different how? Better. Bigger. We could have traveled, bought a real house, joined the country club. We could have been somebody. As opposed to nobody, which is what we were before. That's not what I meant. But it was exactly what she meant. In Vanna's mind, our entire marriage had been a waste. 15 years of settling for less when we could have had more. The fact that I'd chosen modesty over ostentation wasn't admirable to her. It was a betrayal. That evening, Brady called with his preliminary report. Your friend Miles is in serious financial trouble, he said. He owes about $2 million to various creditors, and his investment business is basically a shell company. No real assets, no legitimate income streams. What about recent contacts? That's where it gets interesting. He's been in regular communication with a divorce attorney named Patricia Voss. She specializes in high-asset divorces, particularly cases involving hidden wealth. My stomach dropped. How regular? Daily calls for the past week. Plus, he met with her yesterday afternoon, right before he visited you. I closed my eyes and tried to process what I was hearing. Vanna wasn't just confused or hurt by my deception. She was actively planning to divorce me and take as much money as possible. Miles wasn't acting alone. He was working with her attorney to gather evidence. There's more, Brady continued. Your wife has been researching forensic accountants and private investigators. She's building a case. A case for what? Fraud, probably. If she can prove you've been hiding assets or manipulating financial records, she might be able to claim the entire marriage was based on deception. That could void any prenuptial agreements and entitle her to a much larger settlement. I thought about the prenup we'd signed 15 years ago, a simple document that protected my existing assets, but said nothing about wealth acquired during the marriage. At the time, I'd had relatively little money. Now, the situation was infinitely more complicated. What do you recommend? Document everything, record all conversations, and get yourself a really good attorney. This is going to get ugly. After I hung up, I sat in my office staring at the wall. 15 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Lawyers and private investigators, secret recordings and financial warfare. Vanna had chosen her side, and it wasn't mine. But if she wanted a war, I was uniquely equipped to give her one. I had resources she couldn't imagine, and connections she didn't know existed. Most importantly, I had something she'd forgotten about: patience. I opened my laptop and began making calls. If Vanna thought she could outmaneuver me using Miles Reddick and some divorce attorney, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between having money and understanding how money really worked. The game was just beginning. Saturday morning brought a revelation that changed everything. I was reviewing Brady's full security report when I discovered something that made me laugh out loud, a rare occurrence given recent events. Miles Reddick's financial troubles were worse than Brady had initially reported. Not only was he $2 million in debt, but he'd been using his investment company as a personal ATM, borrowing against client funds to maintain his lifestyle. More importantly, his largest creditor was a subsidiary of one of my holding companies. I owned Miles Reddick's debt. The irony was exquisite. While he'd been plotting with my wife's attorney to expose my hidden assets, he'd been unknowingly paying interest on loans from those same assets. I could foreclose on his business, his condo, and his expensive toys with a simple phone call. But that would be too easy. I had something more elegant in mind. I called my art dealer, a discreet woman named Catherine, who specialized in high-end acquisitions for private collectors. Catherine, it's Lennon. I need you to do something unusual for me. Of course. What do you need? I want you to create perfect forgeries of 3 specific paintings. Then I want you to arrange for the originals to be stolen from a private collection and replaced with the forgeries. There was a pause. That's ethically complex. The paintings belong to me. I'm having them stolen from myself. Ah, that's different. May I ask why? Let's call it an art installation about the nature of authenticity. That afternoon, I drove to Miles's building, a glass tower downtown, where he rented what he called his executive suite, but was really just an overpriced office with a view. I knew he'd be there. Brady's surveillance had confirmed his weekend routine. I took the elevator to the 42nd floor and walked into his reception area, where a young woman sat behind an impressive desk that probably cost more than she made in 6 months. "I'm here to see Miles," I told her. "Lennon Brasken." Her eyes widened slightly. Apparently, my name had been mentioned in recent conversations. "Mr. Reddick is in a meeting," she said nervously. "That's fine. I'll wait." I settled into one of the expensive chairs in the waiting area and pulled out my phone. Within minutes, Miles emerged from his office with a worried-looking man in a cheap suit, probably his lawyer. "Lennon," Miles said, his voice tight with tension. "This is unexpected. I was in the neighborhood, thought I'd stop by and see how business was going." The lawyer whispered something to Miles, who nodded and turned back to me. "Actually, I'm glad you're here. We should talk." He led me into his office, a monument to insecurity featuring oversized furniture, expensive art, and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. Everything was designed to intimidate, which told me everything I needed to know about how Miles saw himself. "Nice place," I said, examining one of the paintings on his wall. "Is this a Rothko?" "Yes. Original, of course." I nodded appreciatively, though I happened to know it was a very good fake. The original was in a private collection in Switzerland, and I'd seen the authentication documents. Must have cost a fortune. Some things are worth the investment. Absolutely. Speaking of investments, I wanted to discuss your debt situation. Miles's face went pale. My what? Your debt. Approximately $2.1 million, spread across various creditors. I've been reviewing the paperwork, and I think we might be able to work something out. I don't know what you're talking about. I pulled out my phone and opened a financial app, then turned the screen toward him. Reddick Investments, LLC. Outstanding obligations to Meridian Capital, Apex Holdings, and Cornerstone Financial Services, all of which are subsidiaries of companies I control. Miles stared at the screen as if it might burst into flames. That's impossible. It's actually quite simple. You borrowed money from companies that borrowed money from other companies that eventually trace back to me. It's called layered ownership, and it's perfectly legal. I could see him struggling to process this information. In his mind, I was still the modest middle manager who drove an old Honda. The idea that I might own his debt, that I might own him, was beyond his comprehension. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you to stop working with my wife's attorney. I want you to stop recording conversations in my home, and I want you to stay away from my family. And if I don't, then I call your loans, all of them, immediately." I stood and straightened my jacket. "You have until Monday to decide. Oh, and Miles, you might want to have that Rothko authenticated. I'd hate for you to discover it's a fake at an inopportune moment." I left him sitting in his expensive chair, staring at the painting on his wall with new uncertainty. That evening, Vanna was unusually quiet during dinner. She picked at her food and kept glancing at her phone, clearly waiting for something. "Expecting a call?" I asked. "Just checking messages." "Anything important?" "Work stuff." But it wasn't work stuff. I could see her screen from across the table, and she was checking for texts from Miles. Texts that weren't coming because Miles was probably sitting in his office, trying to figure out how his perfect plan had gone so wrong. After dinner, Vanna excused herself to take a bath. I waited until I heard the water running, then slipped into our bedroom and checked her laptop. She'd left her email open, and what I found there confirmed my worst fears. She'd been corresponding with Patricia Voss, the divorce attorney, for over a week. The emails detailed a comprehensive strategy for challenging our prenuptial agreement and claiming the maximum possible settlement. They'd discussed hiring forensic accountants, private investigators, and expert witnesses who could testify about hidden assets and financial manipulation. But the most damaging email was the most recent one. "Patricia, I think I've found a way to prove Lennon has been hiding money throughout our marriage. Miles has been gathering evidence, and we should have enough to file by next week. I want to move quickly before he has a chance to hide more assets." I screenshotted the entire email chain and forwarded it to my own attorney. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened Vanna's text messages and read through her recent conversations. What I found there broke something inside me. She'd been talking to her friends about our marriage for months, describing me as boring, unambitious, and a disappointment. She'd complained about our modest lifestyle, our old car, our simple house. She'd even joked about trading up to someone more successful. But the worst message was from 3 days ago, sent to her friend Tabitha. "I can't believe I wasted 15 years with someone so mediocre. If I'd known he was hiding billions, I would have demanded a different life. Now I have to figure out how to get what I deserve without letting him hide everything offshore." I sat on our bed, staring at the phone screen, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. This wasn't about money or revenge anymore. This was about the complete destruction of everything I'd thought was real about my marriage. Vanna emerged from the bathroom, wearing a silk robe I'd bought her for our anniversary. She looked beautiful, relaxed, completely unaware that I'd just discovered the full extent of her betrayal. "How was your day?" she asked, settling beside me on the bed. "Interesting. I had a conversation with Miles." Her body tensed almost imperceptibly. "Oh? What about?" "Business. Turns out we have more in common than I thought." "That's nice." She was trying to sound casual, but I could hear the strain in her voice. "Vanna, can I ask you something?" "Sure. Do you love me?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. She looked at me with confusion and something that might have been guilt. "Of course I love you. Why would you ask that?" "Because I'm trying to understand what we're doing here. You've discovered that I have money, a lot of money, and instead of being happy about it, you seem angry. Instead of talking to me about our future, you're talking to lawyers about our past. I'm trying to figure out if there's anything left worth saving." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I couldn't tell if they were genuine or calculated. "I just feel so betrayed, Lennon. 15 years of marriage, and you never trusted me enough to tell me the truth. How am I supposed to process that?" "The same way I'm processing the fact that my wife has been planning to divorce me since the moment she found out I wasn't poor." Her face went white. "That's not true." "Isn't it? Patricia Voss is an excellent attorney, by the way. Very thorough. I'm sure she's given you detailed advice about maximizing your settlement." Vanna stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mental calculations. Denial warred with defiance, and defiance won. "Fine," she said, standing up and facing me with her chin raised. "Yes, I've talked to a lawyer. Yes, I'm considering my options. After 15 years of lies, I think I have that right." "You absolutely do. Just as I have the right to protect myself from someone who sees our marriage as a business transaction." "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at our quiet neighborhood. Fair would have been trusting me enough to ask about our finances instead of immediately assuming I was hiding something sinister. Fair would have been talking to me about your concerns instead of conspiring with your ex-boyfriend and a divorce attorney. I tried to talk to you. You've been lying to me for our entire marriage. I've been private about my finances. There's a difference. Not to me. And there it was, the fundamental disconnect that had been growing between us for years. To Vanna, privacy was deception, modesty was failure, and wealth was the only measure of success that mattered. "Then I guess we don't have anything left to discuss," I said. She stared at me for a moment longer, then grabbed her phone and headed for the door. "I'm staying at Tabitha's tonight. I need space to think." After she left, I sat alone in our bedroom, surrounded by 15 years of shared memories and accumulated possessions. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of protecting my assets and preparing for what promised to be a very expensive divorce. But tonight, I would mourn the marriage that had already ended, even if neither of us was ready to admit it yet. Sunday morning brought an unexpected phone call that changed the entire trajectory of my carefully planned response. I was drinking coffee and reviewing financial statements when Brady called with urgent news. "Lennon, we have a problem. Miles Reddick didn't just borrow money from your subsidiaries. He's been using your fund's name to solicit additional investors. We're talking about securities fraud on a federal level." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "How bad?" "Bad. He's collected about $3 million from private investors, promising them access to your anchor fund. The SEC is already sniffing around, and if this goes public, it could damage your reputation even if you're completely innocent." "Which I am. I know that, and you know that, but federal investigators don't know that. They're going to want to interview everyone connected to this mess, including you and Vanna." I closed my eyes and tried to process the implications. Miles's desperation had escalated beyond simple debt problems into criminal territory. Worse, his use of my fund's name meant I was now potentially a victim of the same fraud scheme he'd been using to gather evidence against me. There's more, Brady continued. Vanna's attorney has been in contact with the SEC. She's positioning your wife as a whistleblower who discovered her husband's alleged financial crimes. Alleged financial crimes I didn't commit. Doesn't matter. Perception is reality in federal investigations. If the SEC believes Vanna has evidence of wrongdoing, they'll give her immunity in exchange for cooperation. I felt the walls closing in around me. While I'd been playing chess, Miles and Vanna had been playing a completely different game, one with federal prosecutors and criminal charges. What do you recommend? Get ahead of this. File a complaint against Miles for unauthorized use of your fund's name. Provide the SEC with evidence of his fraud, and distance yourself from Vanna before she drags you down with her. After I hung up, I called my attorney and arranged an emergency meeting. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called in favors from people who owed me money, influence, and loyalty. By noon, I had 3 federal attorneys working on my case, a public relations firm managing my reputation, and a private security team monitoring Miles's activities. If this was going to be a war, I intended to win it decisively. Vanna returned home that afternoon looking haggard and nervous. She'd clearly spent the night discussing strategy with Tabitha and probably Patricia Voss. When she saw me sitting calmly in the living room, her expression shifted to something approaching fear. "We need to talk," she said. "I agree. Please, sit down." She perched on the edge of the couch, her body language defensive and alert. "Lennon, I think we're both in over our heads here. Maybe we should try to work this out privately without lawyers." "That's an interesting change of perspective. What happened to your plans with Patricia Voss?" Her face flushed. "I don't know what you're talking about. Vanna, I know about the emails. I know about the strategy sessions. I know about the SEC complaint." I leaned forward slightly. "What I don't know is why you thought it was a good idea to accuse your husband of federal crimes." "I never accused you of anything." "You provided information to federal investigators about alleged financial irregularities in my business dealings. That's the definition of an accusation." She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is insane. All I did was ask some questions about where our money came from. I never intended for it to become a federal investigation." But it has become a federal investigation. Miles Reddick is under criminal investigation for securities fraud. The SEC is reviewing all of my business activities, and you're positioned as the whistleblower who exposed the whole thing. I didn't know Miles was doing anything illegal. Didn't you? You knew he was desperate for money. You knew he was trying to get access to my fund. You knew he was recording conversations in our home. What did you think he was planning to do with all that information?" Vanna sank back onto the couch, her face pale. I thought maybe we could prove you'd been hiding assets. I thought it would help in the divorce proceedings. So you were willing to destroy my reputation and possibly send me to prison just to get a larger settlement. That's not what I wanted, but it's what you set in motion." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of the situation settling between us like a physical presence. Finally, Vanna spoke. "What happens now?" "Now you have a choice. You can continue working with Patricia Voss and the federal investigators, in which case I'll treat you as a hostile witness and protect myself accordingly. Or you can cooperate with my attorneys to resolve this mess before it destroys both of us." "What kind of cooperation?" "Full disclosure of your communications with Miles and Patricia Voss, a complete statement about your knowledge of Miles's activities, and a public retraction of any allegations you've made about my business practices. And in exchange, I don't pursue criminal charges against you for conspiracy to commit fraud." Her eyes widened. "You can't be serious." "I'm completely serious. You conspired with Miles to gather evidence of alleged financial crimes. When that evidence turned out to be fabricated, you provided it to federal investigators anyway. That makes you an accessory to securities fraud." I was trying to protect myself. By destroying me. I understand the logic, Vanna. I just don't accept it. She buried her face in her hands, and for a moment I felt a flicker of the old sympathy. But then I remembered the emails, the text messages, the months of planning and deception. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was a calculated attempt to destroy my life for financial gain. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tomorrow morning. After that, my attorneys file their complaint, and this becomes a matter for the courts to decide. That evening, I received a call from one of my federal attorneys with an update that confirmed my worst fears. The SEC has opened a formal investigation into your investment activities, he said. They're particularly interested in the layered ownership structure you use to control various subsidiaries. All of which is completely legal. Legal, yes, but complex enough to raise questions about intent. They want to know if you've been using shell companies to hide assets from your wife. I've been using legitimate business structures to manage a complex portfolio. My wife's knowledge or lack thereof is irrelevant to the legality of those structures. I agree, but that's not how the investigators see it. They're treating this as a potential case of spousal financial abuse. I felt a bitter laugh escape. Spousal financial abuse, because I didn't tell my wife I was rich. It sounds absurd, but there's legal precedent. If they can prove you deliberately concealed assets to prevent your wife from enjoying the marital lifestyle she was entitled to, they can argue that constitutes a form of financial manipulation. Even though she was enjoying exactly the lifestyle she chose to enjoy? Even though. The law assumes that spouses have a right to know about and participate in major financial decisions. Your secrecy, however well-intentioned, can be interpreted as controlling behavior. After I hung up, I sat in my office contemplating the beautiful irony of the situation. I'd spent 15 years living modestly to test my wife's character, and now that modesty was being used as evidence of financial abuse. I'd hidden my wealth to see if she would love me for who I was rather than what I had, and now that hidden wealth was being portrayed as a weapon of control. The game had become more complex than I'd ever imagined, with stakes higher than I'd ever intended. But I was still playing to win, and I had resources my opponents couldn't begin to comprehend. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, and I intended to end this war decisively. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. I woke before dawn and spent an hour reviewing the documents my legal team had prepared overnight. Everything was in order. Complaints, evidence files, witness statements, and financial records that would expose Miles Reddick's fraud while simultaneously protecting my legitimate business interests. Vanna hadn't come home the night before. According to Brady's surveillance, she'd spent the evening at Patricia Voss's office, presumably making her final decision about which side of this war she wanted to be on. At 8 a.m., my phone rang. It was Patricia Voss herself. Mr. Brasken, I think we should meet before this situation escalates further. I'm listening. My client is prepared to provide full cooperation in exchange for immunity from prosecution. She has information that could be valuable to your case against Mr. Reddick. What kind of information? Evidence that Mr. Reddick has been systematically defrauding investors using your fund's name. Recordings of conversations where he admits to fabricating documents. Financial records showing how he's been misappropriating client funds. I felt a smile tug at the corner of my mouth. Vanna had finally realized that Miles was the real criminal in this scenario, and she was trying to save herself by throwing him under the bus. And what does she want in return? A fair division of marital assets and a confidential settlement agreement. No criminal charges, no public accusations, no federal investigation. That's a significant request. What makes you think I'd agree to those terms? Because the alternative is a very public, very expensive legal battle that damages everyone involved. Your wife made mistakes, Mr. Brasken, but she's not a criminal. She's a woman who discovered her husband had been lying to her for 15 years and reacted poorly. She conspired to commit fraud. She tried to protect herself from what she believed was financial manipulation. There's a difference. I considered the offer carefully. Vanna was offering to help me destroy Miles in exchange for a clean divorce with a reasonable settlement. It was logical, practical, and probably the smartest move for everyone involved. It was also exactly what she'd been planning all along. "I'll consider your proposal," I said finally. "But first, I want to meet with your client, face to face. No lawyers, no recordings, no witnesses." "That's highly irregular." "So is this entire situation. If Vanna wants my cooperation, she needs to convince me that her change of heart is genuine and not just another calculated move." There was a pause. "Where do you want to meet?" "My office. The real one." An hour later, I was sitting in my actual office, the 52nd floor of a downtown tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that stretched to the horizon. This was where I conducted the business that had made me wealthy, surrounded by the infrastructure of legitimate success. Vanna arrived precisely on time, looking smaller and more vulnerable than I'd seen her in years. She wore a simple black dress and minimal makeup, clearly trying to project humility rather than defiance. "This is really your office?" she asked, looking around at the expensive furniture and original artwork. "This is really my office. The home office is just for routine paperwork and phone calls." She walked to the window and stared out at the city below. "How long have you had this place?" 12 years. 12 years. She turned back to me with something approaching wonder. "All those times you said you were working late, you were here, in this office, managing billions of dollars." "Yes, and I never knew." "No." She sat down across from my desk, her hands folded in her lap. "I owe you an apology." "Do you?" "I let my hurt feelings and my anger cloud my judgment. I made assumptions about your motives, and I acted on those assumptions without really understanding what was happening." "What do you think was happening?" "I think you were testing me. I think you wanted to see if I would love you for who you were rather than what you had." Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. And I failed that test. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. What I saw instead was genuine regret and something that might have been shame. "Why did you fail it?" "Because I'm not the person I thought I was. I always believed I was above caring about money, that I married you for love and nothing else. But when I discovered you were wealthy, my first thought wasn't happiness for us. It was resentment that we hadn't been living differently." "And your second thought?" "Was how to get as much as possible in the divorce." At least she was being honest. "And now?" "Now I realize I've destroyed the best thing in my life because I was too proud and too greedy to appreciate what I already had." I leaned back in my chair, considering her words. This could still be an act, a carefully rehearsed performance designed to manipulate my emotions and secure a better settlement. But something in her voice suggested otherwise. "What do you want, Vanna?" "I want to help you stop Miles before he hurts anyone else. I want to make amends for my part in this mess. And I want—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I want to know if there's any chance we could start over." "Start over?" "I know I don't deserve it. I know I've broken your trust in ways that might be irreparable. But if there's any part of you that still loves me, any possibility that we could rebuild what we had—" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city where I'd built my fortune while maintaining the fiction of an ordinary life. 15 years of careful deception, and it had all unraveled in a single week. "Do you know why I never told you about the money?" I asked. "Because you wanted to test me. Partly, but mostly because I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that you would become someone else. Afraid that wealth would change you into a person I didn't recognize." I turned back to face her. "I was afraid you would become exactly the person you became when you found out." She flinched, as if I'd struck her. That's fair. The question is, was that who you really were all along, or was it who you became under pressure? I don't know. I honestly don't know. We stood in silence for several minutes, the weight of 15 years hanging between us. Finally, I made my decision. I'll accept your cooperation against Miles. I'll agree to a reasonable settlement that protects both of us, but I won't agree to start over. Why not? Because trust, once broken, can't be rebuilt with good intentions. You showed me who you are when you thought I couldn't fight back. I can forgive that, but I can't forget it. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she nodded. I understand. Do you? I understand that some mistakes are too big to fix. I understand that I had something precious, and I threw it away because I wanted something different. I understand that you're a better person than I am, and I probably never deserved you in the first place. I felt something inside me shift, not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of peace. This was ending the way it needed to end, with honesty instead of hatred. You deserved honesty from me, I said. I should have trusted you with the truth from the beginning. Maybe if I had, things would have been different. Maybe. Or maybe I would have shown you who I really was 15 years ago instead of last week. She was probably right. The test had revealed something fundamental about both of us. My need for control and her hunger for status. Neither was particularly admirable. What happens now? She asked. Now you help me destroy Miles Reddick. Then we end our marriage as cleanly and quietly as possible. And then we both try to learn from this experience. And Miles? Miles is going to discover what happens when you try to defraud a billionaire. It won't be pleasant. That afternoon, Vanna provided my attorneys with everything: recordings, documents, financial records, and detailed testimony about Miles's fraudulent activities. The evidence was overwhelming and damning. By evening, federal agents had arrested Miles Reddick on charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. His assets were frozen, his business was shut down, and his reputation was destroyed beyond repair. The investigation into my activities was quietly closed when it became clear that I was a victim rather than a perpetrator. My business practices were reviewed and found to be completely legitimate. 6 months later, my divorce from Vanna was finalized. She received a settlement that was generous but not excessive, enough to live comfortably, but not enough to fund the lifestyle she'd briefly imagined. Miles Reddick was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. I never remarried. I never told anyone else about my wealth until it became necessary, and I never again underestimated the corrosive power of secrets in a relationship. But I also never regretted the test that revealed the truth about the woman I'd loved for 15 years. Some knowledge is worth any price, even the price of a broken heart. The table had been turned, the game had been won, and I had learned the most expensive lesson of my life: that love without trust is just another form of transaction, and transactions always end when the price becomes too high. In the end, that knowledge was worth more than all the money I'd hidden and all the wealth I'd revealed. It was the foundation for whatever came next, built on truth instead of deception, honesty instead of manipulation, and for the first time in 15 years, that felt like enough.